Xie Huaishu harbors a venomous hatred for me, wishing only that we might never cross paths again in the next life. He schemed to have me replace his beloved, sending me off to the distant frontier as a bride to bring luck to a young general. He wanted to see me spend my days in solitude, chanting prayers before a dim lamp, suffering a life of loneliness. Yet little did he expect that in this lifetime, it would still be me who sits upon the throne as the Empress. But the one who ascended to that supreme position was no longer him. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now the story begins. 2 imperial marriage decrees descended from the palace. One was for me, the other for my half-sister Song Qingwan. Unlike in my past life, Song Qingwan was betrothed to Xie Huaishu, while I, the legitimate daughter of the duke's household, was betrothed to General Hua's young heir. After the eunuch finished proclaiming the imperial decree, the crowd kneeling before the duke's residence rose to their feet. My old ears fail me. Grandmother hesitated before asking, "Dare I ask, Your Excellency, did His Majesty's decree betroth Jinyuan to the Hua family and Qingwan to Prince Huai?" The lead eunuch smiled. Even with 10 extra lives, this humble servant wouldn't dare misinterpret His Majesty's decree. Not a single person present remained unshocked, no matter what. It should have been me marrying into the royal family, while Song Qingwan was sent to the borderlands. Only I remained expressionless, watching the scene unfold before me. A month ago, while inspecting Jiangnan, His Majesty encountered an old Taoist priest. That old priest's divinations were remarkably accurate, capable of glimpsing 3 inches into the heavens' will. I heard that old Taoist priest accurately predicted the 7 consecutive days of heavy rain this month that caused the Luo River to breach its banks. Such a divine figure, I'd never heard of him in my previous life. Not long after the floodwaters receded, the Emperor's decree of marriage arrived. No doubt that old priest didn't just foresee the flood, he must have predicted other matters as well. Suddenly, I remembered my past life when Xie Huaishu, drunk, gripped my neck fiercely. His eyes bloodshot as he glared at me. "If not for your schemes, Qingwan wouldn't have died miserably in that bitter, frozen borderland. I spared her life back then, that was mercy enough." I smiled at him. "Xie Huaishu, what are you afraid of? I'm just a weak woman, with just a little more force. My neck could snap in your hands." Yet he still released me. "Killing you would be too dull. I want you to live a fate worse than death." I only learned after his ascension to the throne that Song Qingwan had long occupied his heart. The bond of childhood sweethearts ultimately couldn't withstand love at first sight. Back then, Song Qingwan became a widow shortly after her distant marriage to the frontier. Later, she died under the blades of roaming bandits while fleeing back to the capital. After her death, the suicide note found in her embrace made me the prime culprit responsible for her demise. Xie Huaishu had long harbored an intense hatred for me, yet to exploit me and secure his supreme position, he pretended to be a devoted husband, maintaining this charade of marital bliss with me for years. "Song Jinyuan," he uttered my name, his voice icy cold as he spoke. "The greatest regret of my life was making a woman as ruthless as you my Empress. In my past life, he often said that his deepest regret was marrying me. If there were a next life, Xie Huaishu would surely never have anything to do with me again. That's why, in this lifetime, the imperial decree of marriage was given to someone else, so he was also reborn." Upon hearing the decree, Song Qingwan's eyes brimmed with joy. She walked to my side and whispered in a voice meant only for our ears, "Little sister has heard that the borderlands are bitterly cold and harsh. I wonder if an elder sister like you, raised in such pampered comfort as the legitimate daughter, can endure such hardships." I ignored her, brushed the dust off my dress, and walked toward the courtyard. Song Qingwan, however, stepped forward to block my path. "Elder sister must not know yet that young General Hua is gravely wounded. Perhaps your marriage could bring him some luck," she said, unable to suppress her smugness as she covered her lips with a laugh. "But if the young general happens to pass away right after you marry, sister might end up a widow for life." At this time, news of Hua Changfeng's severe injuries had not yet reached the capital. This must have been told to her by Xie Huaishu. I curled my lips. "You're telling me this news to make me flee the marriage, aren't you?" Her eyes widened instantly. "You wouldn't dare defy the imperial decree. The marriage alliance with the Hua family was originally arranged by father with great effort for you, yet it fell upon me instead." I raised my eyes to ask her, "Do you know why father dotes on you so much, yet insists on marrying you off to such a remote place?" Her trembling lashes met my icy gaze. "Why?" The smile at my lips deepened. "Because he was afraid he couldn't protect your life." Her almond-shaped eyes widened slightly. What do you mean by that? I curved my lips toward her. But my voice was icy cold. If you don't want to die an unnatural death like your mother, don't provoke me. Song Qingwan's birth mother was originally a maid serving under my mother. While my mother was gravely ill, she climbed into my father's bed. Mother said it wasn't a significant matter for father to favor a chambermaid, but Li Ying'er was no docile creature, born in a brothel with striking looks. She'd entered the household with the sole purpose of climbing into the master's bed, yet her arrival coincided with my father and mother's honeymoon period, so father assigned Li Ying'er to serve in mother's courtyard. Mother had always ruled the servants with an iron hand, and Li Ying'er had long nurtured resentment toward her. Under the pretense of attending to mother, she began illicit trysts with my father in the side chamber, let the sounds of passion drift into mother's chamber. But by then, mother no longer had time to discipline her. She was busy arranging a future for me before her death. Grandmother had always cared only for my brother, the legitimate heir, and father was utterly unreliable. If mother were gone, no one would properly raise me, at this time. The turmoil in the palace had just subsided, and the new emperor ascended the throne with the support of his ministers. My mother's aunt, though unrelated by blood to the new emperor, had assumed the position of Empress Dowager. My mother wrote to request the Empress Dowager to take me in and raise me by her side, but the personal maidservant advised against it. Her Majesty is deeply cunning. If the young lady grows up by her side, she might also become. Aunt is the wisest woman in our clan. She merely obtained the power and influence she desired. Were she a man, none would accuse her of being scheming. If Jinyuan could gain aunt's protection, she would surely grow up safe and fortunate. Mother coughed twice into her hand, streaks of blood seeping through her fingers. She merely wiped them carelessly with a silk handkerchief and continued writing her letter. The candlelight illuminated mother's gentle brows and eyes as the ink from her brush spread across the paper. She said, "What does it matter if one schemes with ulterior motives, as long as one can protect oneself and obtain what one desires?" When my mother passed away, I was barely 2 years old and was taken into the palace to be raised by the Empress Dowager. On the day I returned to the Duke's mansion after coming of age, I asked the Empress Dowager, last month when I left the palace, I met Yunxiu, who once served by my mother's side. She told me that although my mother was seriously ill back then, the imperial physician said she could still live for 2 more years, so why did she not survive those 2 years? I recall the imperial physician said your mother died of an incurable illness. The Empress Dowager paused while holding her teacup, a trace of ruthlessness flashing in her eyes. Perhaps, we shouldn't entirely trust what the imperial physicians say. I've investigated. The physician who treated my mother passed away 3 months after retiring to his hometown. Those who served my mother either died or were sold off. Then what have you discovered? Lowering my gaze, I replied, I found nothing from questioning mother's former attendants. So I captured one of grandmother's maids and used palace interrogation methods. I learned, mother died from a sudden rage-induced heart attack. Your father and grandmother are famously respectable people. That's how noble families are always so concerned about keeping their dirty laundry hidden. The Empress Dowager gave a cold laugh, her gaze settling on me. What do you intend to do? I met her eyes steadily and said, keeping family matters private, this subject needs no more than your Majesty's word. On the day I returned to the estate, the nanny Zhao, who had been kidnapped by bandits, was also ransomed by my grandmother and brought back to the Duke's residence. Despite her injuries not yet fully healed, Nanny Zhao was in a hurry to return to my grandmother's side to serve her. When I went to pay respects to my grandmother, Aunt Li also arrived. Not long after I entered the palace, she gave birth to Song Qingwan, and in recent years, she bore a son, favored by my father. She was always dressed in fine silks and adorned with lavish ornaments. Carrying herself with the air of a legitimate wife, one could hardly tell she was merely a concubine in the household. Aunt Li inevitably grew arrogant from such favor, and my grandmother increasingly disapproved of her. Aunt Li knelt to pay her respects, but grandmother didn't let her rise, instead focusing entirely on exchanging pleasantries with me. Soon, Nanny Zhao brought out the tea. This is dragon well tea picked before the rains, brought by the young mistress from the palace. I brewed it with snow water collected from plum blossoms last year. Grandmother took a sip from her teacup and said to me, "This tea is truly fragrant. The Dowager Empress certainly bestows only the finest things upon you." I held the teacup and looked at Aunt Li kneeling on the ground, speaking softly, "Auntie, you should also try this tea." Only then did grandmother allow Aunt Li to rise. Aunt Li took the teacup handed to her by Nanny Zhao, took 2 sips, and then set the cup down. She looked displeased and stood up to bow to her grandmother. "Madam, This humble one is feeling unwell and must take her leave." Grandmother watched her retreating figure and snorted coldly. "Look at that air of arrogance, as if she's accustomed to such fine tea. Your father is utterly bewitched by her, sending all the finest things in the household straight to her courtyard." I tugged at my lips, the smile not reaching my eyes. "Aunt Lee has borne children to continue the family line for the Duke's household. It's only right that father favors her." Grandmother looked at me and said, "The children she bore are merely of concubine birth. How could they compare to you and brother Yuan, both born of the principal wife?" Whether born of the principal wife or a concubine, I cared not at all. All I care about is whether anyone will stand in the way of me and my younger brother, in his childhood. Our grandmother spoiled my brother excessively. She couldn't bear the thought of him going to school in snowy weather, which resulted in him not receiving any formal education until the age of 6. I pleaded with the Empress Dowager for a long time before securing Song Yuan the opportunity to enter the palace as a study companion. Day after day, I supervised his studies, which is how he acquired his current knowledge. Today, Aunt Lee is wearing a golden hairpin with a peony design, a pattern reserved only for the principal wife. If this were the imperial palace, such overstepping would have cost Aunt Lee her life long ago. I set down my teacup and sighed softly. It's only because grandmother is so tolerant. Everyone in the household knew that grandmother and Aunt Lee had been at odds for a long time. Now, grandmother had finally found a reason to discipline her. Aunt Lee knelt under the scorching sun for a full hour before she was allowed back inside. Only after my father returned home, it was said that Aunt Lee wept uncontrollably that night, and my father stayed in her quarters to console her. The night was as still as water when, in the midst of their intimacy, concubine Lee suddenly bled from all 7 orifices and died violently atop my father. My father's agonized screams pierced the night sky of the Duke's residence. Years ago, my mother had died prematurely from their provocations. Now, this was their retribution. It took several days before my father regained his senses. The coroner determined that concubine Lee had died suddenly from poisoning. That day, concubine Lee had only drunk a cup of tea in grandmother's room. My father dared not confront grandmother openly, fearing it would invite outsiders to mock the Duke's household for its domestic turmoil, so he had no choice but to keep the matter hidden. Thus, the relationship between mother and son gradually grew distant. The Empress Dowager was right. This Duke's residence truly values face above all else. Grandmother disliked concubine Lee, and by extension, she also disliked the 2 children concubine Lee had borne. Countless times in private, she cursed Song Qingwan's seductive looks, saying they were inherited from her birth mother, fearing that grandmother would eventually harm Song Qingwan. My father went to great lengths to secure this marriage alliance with the Hua family for her. Song Qingwan didn't catch the meaning behind my words, merely stamping her foot in feigned anger. "You're scaring me. Just wait till I tell His Highness Prince Huai." The dangers within the palace walls were no less than those at the frontier. Who knew if Xie Huaishu could protect her in this lifetime? I couldn't be bothered with her and walked straight toward Song Yuan's courtyard. Song Yuan was only a year younger than me, yet he seemed quite afraid of me. The moment I stepped into the study, he hastily opened his book, Elder Sister. I was just reviewing my lessons. I only paused to drink a bowl of sweet soup. Watching Song Yuan's flustered state, it was hard to imagine this man would later become a marquis and rise to the highest ranks of government in his previous life. Even Emperor Xie Huaishu had to defer to him. In their previous life, Xie Huaishu had long been wary of him. Now that Xie Huaishu had been reborn, he would surely eliminate him without anyone noticing. I sat down across from him and said, "His Majesty has decreed that I marry far away to the frontier. The journey will be unfamiliar and lonely. I'm a little afraid. Come with me." "Does elder sister also feel afraid?" He raised his eyes to stare at me, his gaze unwavering. "If elder sister wants me to accompany you, I will." But I cut him off. "Don't worry, I have a way to get you out of this Duke's residence." Song Yuan hesitated for a moment. I thought he was having second thoughts, but unexpectedly he smiled and said, "If elder sister doesn't wish to marry, you could seek out the Empress Dowager. Perhaps she could arrange a different husband for you. The Empress Dowager has gone to the summer palace to recuperate, and I don't wish to disturb her peace with such matters." I chuckled softly. In truth, it makes no difference who it is. Even without His Majesty's arranged marriage, my marital fate was never mine to decide. Not only did Xie Huaishu regret it, but I did too, in this lifetime. No matter whom I marry, I refuse to have any further entanglement with Xie Huaishu. The next day, the Hua family's wedding procession arrived at the gates of the Duke's residence. In my past life, it was Song Qingwan who left. But this time, it's me. Years of estrangement had distanced me from my father, and unlike the tears he shed when sending Song Qingwan off to her marriage in our previous life, he remained dry-eyed now. Grandmother, however, managed to squeeze out a few tears and handed me a pair of white jade bracelets. I accepted the white jade bracelets, then glanced at the pair of translucent emerald green ones adorning Song Qingwan's wrists. My grandmother, who always claimed to dote on me the most, was actually the most adept at currying favor with those in power. I had my personal maid, Xiaohong, put away the bracelet and boarded the carriage. As the carriage curtain fell, I heard my father ask the steward, "Where is Song Yuan? Wasn't he always closest to his eldest sister? Why didn't he come to see her off? The young master had a high fever last night and just took medicine this morning before falling asleep. He said he won't be coming." Song Yuan, dressed as a servant boy beside me, whispered quietly, "Elder sister, the excuse of having smallpox can only cover for half a month at most. If the junior tutor finds out, you'll surely get your palms beaten. Don't worry. Father and grandmother will keep it quiet for you. Skipping your studies to sneak out and see me off at my wedding is far too disgraceful for the Duke's household. I only said that because you're marrying so far away. Sister, it'll be hard for us to meet again after this." Looking at Song Yuan's flushed expression, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. He raised his eyes to look at me. "Sister, what are you laughing at?" I shook my head. "Nothing. It's just been years since I've seen you like this." In his previous life, after Song Yuan entered officialdom, the clarity in his brows and eyes was never seen again, only growing increasingly ruthless. It was he who supported me, securing my position as the Empress in the central palace. Song Yuan and I traveled leisurely, enjoying the mountains and waters, making our journey much slower. By the time the carriage arrived at Ningyuan City, General Hua had already breathed his last. The general's mansion was draped in mourning white, with funeral banners hanging low. Was this news concealed all along just to trick elder sister into coming to the border? Song Yuan clenched his fists, looking at me with concern. Elder sister is the legitimate daughter of the Duke's household. How could she endure such humiliation? In my past life, I was married to Xie Huaishu for 20 years. I knew his ways all too well. He must have suppressed the news to make me marry into the Hua family like Song Qingwan did in the previous life. I sneered mockingly. He's overthinking it. I'd rather marry a dead man than him. Song Yuan turned around upon hearing my murmur and asked me, "Sister, what did you say?" "Nothing. Whether I marry or not isn't important. What matters is staying alive." Song Yuan sighed. "Thank goodness my elder sister asked me to accompany her. Otherwise I would have been the one to drink that poisoned soup." Just yesterday, news came from the capital that a servant in Song Yuan's courtyard had secretly drunk some soup brought from the kitchen and died of poisoning, thus exposing Song Yuan's feigned illness. This trip wasn't in vain after all, as it allowed Song Yuan to escape calamity. After the gatekeeper of the Hua residence went to announce their arrival, General Hua quickly came out to greet them. He had just suffered the loss of his son, his entire frame gaunt and emaciated. "Miss Song, please return. As for the marriage arrangement between you and my son, I will report to His Majesty. The engagement is hereby annulled." I watched as a few panicked-looking guards hurried past the morning hall and asked softly, "Has something happened in the general's residence?" General Hua did not respond. I took a step forward and lowered my voice, saying, "Has someone in the residence fallen victim to foul play? I have some knowledge of antidotes." General Hua's expression turned grave, and he quickly replied, "Miss Song, please follow me." I was led by General Hua into a room, and as soon as I stepped inside, the scent of blood assaulted my senses. A pale-faced man with purple lips lay on the bed. I recognized this man. It was Xie Yuan. In my past life, aside from Song Yuan, the person Xie Huaishu feared most was this illustrious Prince Su, whose military exploits overshadowed even the Emperor's authority. The military doctor handed me a small fragment of a sleeve arrow extracted from Xie Yuan's body. "This is the poisoned arrow extracted from His Highness. I've temporarily suppressed the toxicity, but my knowledge is limited. I cannot identify this poison nor prepare an antidote. Might the young lady recognize it?" I took the arrow and glanced at Deputy General Lin standing beside Xie Yuan. "This wrist arrow has a maximum range of 6 zhong. There must be a traitor within the general's residence. All personnel in the residence have been detained, but with His Highness's poisoning worsening, interrogation may be too late now." I walked straight out of the house with the poisoned arrow. Where the guards were waiting in the courtyard, I carefully examined those men. Sure enough, among them I spotted an old acquaintance from my past life, Wuhan, the shadow guard by Xie Huaishu's side. A flawless killer leaves no trace in my past life. I'd secretly eliminated countless people for Xie Huaishu. I paced over to stand before him. His expression remained composed as he cupped his hands in salute. Before he could utter a word, I viciously drove the blood-stained poison arrow into his arm. Wu Chen's pupils instantly contracted. Everyone stared at this scene in shock, the silence around them so profound one could hear a pin drop. I know you're all the prince's elite guards. I took a step back and smiled at Wu Hen. Then let you test this poison for his highness. The venom on the arrowhead took effect swiftly. Wu Hen's lips turned purple, his face deathly pale as he collapsed to the ground. He struggled to pull out a pill from his chest. I shouted loudly, "That's the antidote in his hand." Deputy General Lin swiftly snatched the pill from his grasp and looked at me in a daze. I nodded and said, "This is the antidote. Take it and give it to His Highness." Deputy General Lin left with the antidote. And I frowned as I looked at Wu Hen lying on the ground. "You wouldn't have only this one antidote, would you?" Wu Hen glared at me fiercely, blood soon seeping from the corners of his eyes. He vomited a mouthful of black blood and quickly breathed his last. To think that the most formidable shadow guard under Xie Huaishu's command would meet his end like this in this lifetime. I averted my gaze and turned back toward the house. By now, Xie Yuan had taken the antidote. And his complexion had improved significantly. Squinting slightly, he looked at me and asked, "How did you manage to uncover the assassin?" I paused for a moment before saying, "I've seen this man by Prince Huai's side before. Given the relationship between your highness and Prince Huai, I don't think he would send someone to protect you so closely, would he?" Xie Yuan's lips curled slightly. "Miss Song is truly clever. Many thanks for saving my life." Xie Yuan had Deputy General Lin personally escort me out. Just as I stepped outside, Song Yuan rushed into the courtyard from beyond the gates, his voice trembling as he spoke to me. "I just saw a blooded corpse being carried out. They said the man was an assassin. Elder sister, you weren't frightened, were you?" I froze for a moment before realizing that in Song Yuan's eyes, I was still his delicate elder sister. "Your sister is fine. The assassin just now was far from me." As I finished speaking, I caught from the corner of my eye what seemed to be a twitch at the corner of Deputy General Lin's eye. General Hua's younger sister, Consort Xian, was Xie Yuan's birth mother. 12 years ago, after Consort Xian passed away, Xie Yuan was exiled by His Majesty to Ningyuan City and never returned to the capital again. Everyone in the capital knew that Xie Yuan was the least favored prince. However, he was the only remaining bloodline of the Hua family. General Hua, grateful that I had saved Xie Yuan's life, treated me with the courtesy of an honored guest. However, someone by his side whispered a reminder. His Majesty learned of the young general's death days ago, yet issued no decree summoning Miss Song back to the capital. It seems His Majesty intends for Miss Song to perform the wedding ceremony with the young general's memorial tablet. Upon hearing this, General Hua roared in anger. "This is utterly absurd. Miss Song just saved Xie Yuan's life." I murmured softly, "To marry into the Hua family even if my husband is no longer here would still ensure a lifetime of security and comfort." Song Yuan looked at me with disbelief. "Elder sister, you're actually willing? Have you lost your mind?" "Sister, however." I set down my teacup and abruptly changed the subject. "Rather than this matter, General Hua should consider carefully that assassin was Prince Huai's subordinate, if Prince Huai ascends the throne in the future. Both Prince Su's faction and the Hua family will likely be left with no path to survival." General Hua narrowed his eyes. "What the young lady means to say is..." Song Yuan hurriedly stepped forward to cover my mouth. "My sister is merely a delicate woman of the household. Please don't take her thoughtless words to heart." "General Hua," I pried Song Yuan's hand away, shot him a glare, and continued, "What I mean is, there's a mole in the general's residence. The most urgent matter now is to conduct a thorough investigation. Prince Huai is a treacherous man who knows what false accusations he might fabricate against the general once he ascends the throne." General Hua came to his senses. "I'll have my men investigate immediately." I seized the opportunity to push Song Yuan forward. "My brother is not only intelligent but also the most meticulous. Perhaps he can be of help to the general." General Hua nodded. "Then we shall trouble young Master Song." After Song Yuan bowed and took his leave, he whispered in my ear, "So that's what you meant, elder sister." I thought, "What do you mean?" Song Yuan curled his lips. "Nothing." I sneered inwardly. Did Song Yuan just think I was trying to incite the Hua family to rebel and make Xie Yuan compete with Xie Huaishu, the legitimate eldest son, for the throne? Such things should never be spoken aloud. Of course, some underhanded methods had to be employed, stirring things up behind the scenes. In her past life, The illustrious Hua family had completely declined due to a single war, the soldiers sent to request reinforcements were killed, and General Hua led his 5,000 elite troops in a desperate resistance for 7 days and nights before falling beneath the blades of tens of thousands of enemy troops. Xie Huaishu seemed to have known about this all along and had long since sent someone to Ningyuan City to bring Song Qingwan back to the capital. However, when Song Qingwan fled back to the capital with the money, she died under the blades of roaming bandits. Xie Huaishu's men only found Song Qingwan's corpse. When he confronted me with the letter full of resentment found in Song Qingwan's embrace, news of General Hua's death in battle had not yet reached the capital. At that time, I couldn't help but wonder how Xie Huaishu had known about the border war situation in advance, unless this was all part of his scheme from the very beginning. Following my suggestion, Song Yuan began investigating the assets of General Hua's subordinate soldiers. He soon discovered that one of General Hua's trusted aides, who came from a poor background, actually owned a residence in the capital, a mansion where his elderly mother lived. Under severe interrogation, the aide confessed that the mansion had been a gift from Chancellor Liu. Liu Xiangjing was Xie Huaishu's maternal grandfather, in their previous life. To eliminate dissidents and hasten Xie Huaishu's ascension to the throne, Liu Xiangjing actually schemed to execute meritorious generals like General Hua. In the years following General Hua's death in battle, the borderlands fell into enemy hands, forcing Xie Huaishu to cede territory for peace. Had it not been for Xie Yuan's months of bitter combat later, repelling the enemy forces 300 li, Xie Huaishu's empire would likely have been completely at their mercy. General Hua looked at the blood-stained confession and was about to execute the traitor on the spot according to military law. Beheading him, I exchanged a glance with Song Yuan. Song Yuan stood up and advised, "General Hua, if you kill him now, you might alert the enemy, and they'll likely plant another spy by your side. Spare his life for now, whatever messages he sends back in the future will be entirely at your discretion." As I watched Song Yuan, it was as if I were seeing the song of my past life, the Grand Chancellor who strategized victory from 1,000 miles away, truly worthy of my careful cultivation. At this moment, I didn't notice that my expression was being thoroughly observed by Xie Yuan sitting across from me. The smile at the corner of my lips hadn't yet faded as I raised my eyes to meet his gaze, which carried a scrutinizing tone. He curled his lips and asked me, "How come I remember that back in the palace, Miss Song always favored the second prince the most, but now, my heart suddenly sank. Xie Huaishu and I grew up together as childhood sweethearts, and everyone knew I was devoted to him, yet now, we've suddenly become as incompatible as fire and water. How could I possibly explain to Xie Yuan that it's because I've been reborn that I'm acting this way, at this moment?" General Hua cleared his throat. "Miss Song is a woman of great virtue. How could she possibly care about such trivial matters of the heart?" My back suddenly straightened with pride. After the banquet ended, Song Yuan pondered for a moment before quickly stepping to my side and asking, "Before, everyone said that elder sister would marry Prince Huai, and I always thought elder sister was fond of Prince Huai. But now it seems that's not the case." I curved my lips, just about to hear him praise me for my righteousness, when suddenly I heard him say, "Could it be that elder sister admires His Highness Prince Su?" My foot slipped, and I nearly tumbled down the stone steps. I didn't. I turned to glare at Song Yuan, only to see Xie Yuan standing not far away, looking in my direction. I froze for a moment, then quickly ran away. Song Yuan chased after me, demanding, "Sister, if you didn't, then why are you running?" My heart was pounding so hard it nearly leapt out of my throat as I ran back into the house. It took several glasses of water before my emotions finally settled. I had thought that even if we'd been entangled in a past life, meeting Xie Yuan again in this lifetime would feel like encountering a stranger. My mind remained unsettled, and I didn't fall asleep until deep into the night. In a daze, I dreamt of my past life. Back then, Xie Huaishu had already firmly secured the imperial throne and made me his empress, a virtuous and gentle empress, yet one who was left neglected. I had accompanied Xie Huaishu to the pinnacle of power, but somehow, the deep affection of our youth had turned into estrangement overnight. Xie Huaishu's most beloved concubine resembles me in her delicate features, and her temperament mirrors my own former vivacity. They all say Xie Huaishu still carries me in his heart. Yet I find it laughable. Before I've even died, he's already found a replacement. That stand-in, emboldened by his favor, dared to affront me. I made her kneel in punishment before the palace gates, and in less than half an hour, a pool of blood had formed beneath her. The imperial physician said she had miscarried. Xie Huaishu was furious and punished me by confining me to the temple to copy Buddhist scriptures for a month. It was then that I discovered the palace's Buddhist hall was the most tranquil and soothing place of all. When insomnia strikes, I often go there to rest. One silent night, I was awakened by noises from behind the screen as I lay slumped over the desk. Your Majesty, I have confirmed that Consort Lan was never with child. She bribed the imperial physician to frame the Empress. I know. Xie Huaishu gazed coldly at an unnamed memorial tablet before the Buddha statue. I deliberately punished her by sending her here to copy scriptures, forcing her to kneel daily before Qingwan's spirit tablet to atone. If not for her, Qingwan would never have died so cruelly in those barbaric lands. Qingwan, that nameless memorial tablet actually belonged to Song Qingwan. It dawned on me that compared to me, Consort Lan's features bore a closer resemblance to Song Qingwan's. After Song Qingwan's death, Xie Huaishu once confronted me with her suicide note in hand. He believed every word of my explanation. He comforted me, saying he understood me and that I could never be as cruel as described in the letter. Turns out, when he said he believed me, it was all a lie. I had almost forgotten about Song Qingwan, yet who would have thought that she, who had been dead for so long, was the one in Xie Huaishu's heart? Xie Huaishu asked Wuhan, "Is everything prepared?" "Everything is prepared, Your Majesty. However much you despise her, she is still the Empress. This might still damage Your Majesty's dignity. Do it discreetly. If she hadn't threatened her father to send Qingwan to the border, Qingwan wouldn't have lost her chastity and been violated to death." Xie Huaishu's voice was dark and vicious. His teeth clenched as he said, "I'll make her taste that same humiliation. After so many years of marriage, he would actually use such despicable means to destroy me." Shivering behind the screen, I stood frozen in place for what felt like an eternity. Later, Wuhan found no opportunity to strike in my bedchamber and could only make his move during the mid-autumn banquet. At the feast, the drugged wine I had switched was given by Xie Huaishu as a reward to Xie Yuan, who had just distinguished himself in battle. Xie Yuan, unable to hold his liquor, retired to a side chamber to rest. Staring at the unnatural flush on his face, I suddenly sensed that something terrible was about to happen. Before returning to my chambers, I sneaked into the side hall. Just as I took out the antidote I carried and was about to feed it into his mouth, his eyes suddenly flew open. He seized my wrist in an iron grip. The warmth of his palm burned through the fabric, making even the air between us scalding. I looked at him and explained in a low voice, "The wine you drank was drugged by Xie Huaishu. This is the antidote." He frowned slightly and asked me in a hoarse voice, "Then, where's the antidote?" The pill in my hand had fallen to the ground because of his movement just now, and I didn't know where it had rolled away to. My voice was trembling. It fell." Xie Yuan took a deep breath. "If you run now, you might still have a chance to live." I took 2 steps back, then stopped and walked up to stand before Xie Yuan. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders and looked up at him. If I run away, that would truly leave me with no way out. Xie Yuan's eyes darkened. Filled with a trace of anguish, he didn't understand the meaning behind my words, nor would he have time to figure it out now. His grip around my waist was painfully tight. Xie Yuan lowered his head and fiercely captured my lips with his own. The night was deep and heavy with dew, droplets falling upon the peonies outside the window. I was thrown onto the soft couch as Xie Yuan grabbed my ankle, pulling me into a tide of feverish heat. It wasn't until the sky lightened at dawn that I dragged my exhausted body back to my own chambers. At this moment, the guard who had been arranged to ruin my virtue had already become a bloody corpse. Carried out of the palace, Xie Huaishu mocked me. "Song Jinyuan, how can you still have the face to sit in the position of Empress after committing such shameless acts?" I lowered my gaze to look at my freshly painted nails with henna, curling my lips into a smile. "Your Majesty, it was only after trying with others that I realized your skills in bed are rather unimpressive." Xie Huaishu's face turned green with rage. He came intending to humiliate me, but ended up being humiliated himself. In his previous life, Xie Yuan never married, and everyone assumed he had no interest in women. No one knew that every few days, I would disguise myself as a palace maid and sneak out to visit his residence, besides sharing intimate moments with him. I also revealed the truth about General Hua's death in battle, driving a wedge between him and Xie Huaishu. Xie Yuan held significant military power, and only when Xie Huaishu grew increasingly wary of him would he desperately seek to consolidate his own influence. It was during this time that Song Yuan gradually ascended to high positions. To stabilize the former dynasty, Xie Huaishu found himself increasingly dependent on the Song family's power. He dared not act rashly against me. All he could do was neglect me. Yet Consort Lan lacked discernment. Seeing me fall from favor, she sought to seize the opportunity to eliminate me and take my place. She concealed the deadly red crane poison beneath her fingernails and slipped it into the bowl of bird's nest soup served to me. I accepted the bowl and approached her, sighing softly. Consort Lan appears clever, but this bird's nest soup lacks proper refinement. Imperial Consort Lan's voice trembled. If Her Majesty the Empress finds this concubine's work unsatisfactory, I shall prepare another bowl. Not far away, Xie Yuan's intense gaze that had been fixed upon me gradually shifted away. I smiled faintly. Even if it's poorly made, it would be wasteful for this palace not to drink it. Hearing this, Imperial Consort Lan visibly relaxed. I continued, then I'll bestow it upon you to drink. Her face was full of shock, and before she could react, I grabbed her chin roughly. The entire bowl of bird's nest soup was poured into her mouth. Consort Lan soon foamed at the mouth and collapsed to the ground. My personal maid rushed forward and seized her fingertips, spotting the poison lodged beneath her nails, and shouted, Consort Lan actually dared to poison Her Majesty the Empress. I lifted my gaze to Xie Huaishu. Your Majesty, this crime warrants the extermination of 9 generations, does it not? At the palace banquet, everyone stared in shock at me, the one who had just personally forced the poisoned soup down Consort Lan's throat, their faces instantly twisting with terror. Only Xie Yuan continued sipping his wine with leisurely composure. I publicly executed Xie Huaishu's most beloved concubine. Xie Huaishu stared at me with bloodshot eyes, as if consumed by hatred, yet with irrefutable evidence in hand, he couldn't punish me, only feigning comfort toward me, receiving Xie Huaishu's false consolation. The fear between my brows instantly dissipated. I stood up, glanced at the corpse of Consort Lan being carried out, and whispered to Xie Huaishu, Your Majesty doesn't like the dead. I suppose Your Majesty must like Consort Lan even more now. Xie Huaishu's eyes nearly burst with rage as he gritted his teeth and said, You venomous woman. After the palace banquet ended that night, Xie Huaishu fell ill. Perhaps it was because of Consort Lan's death, or perhaps it was because I had angered him. According to the attending eunuch, he ran a high fever and cursed me even in his sleep. That night, Xie Yuan pinned me down on the bed. He gripped my chin, forcing me to look up at him. Was I also part of your scheme? His deep, icy eyes fixed on me under the moonlight. You pitted me against Xie Huaishu, all to prop up your maternal family and keep him from touching you. Only with you can I survive, so you are my life. I rested my hands on his shoulders, leaning close to whisper in his ear. If one day Xie Huaishu truly tries to kill me, will you save me? A chilling intensity slowly spread through Xie Yuan's gaze as his movements turned abruptly fierce, shattering my breath. A long time passed before I finally heard him sneer coldly, Of course not. After waking from the dream, I let out a long sigh. In my past life, Xie Yuan had been so heartless to me even in bed. This lifetime would surely be even colder. As I pondered how to deal with the reborn Xie Huaishu after returning to the capital, I pushed open the door only to see Xie Yuan standing beneath the pear tree in the courtyard, gazing in my direction. A gentle breeze wafted by, scattering the last petals. I stared at the white petals on his shoulder and frowned as I asked, Your Highness, how long have you been standing here? Were you waiting for me? After a dazed moment, he replied, Miss Song saved me. It's only right that I ensure your safe return to the capital. I pursed my lips. Actually, I'm not as noble-minded as General Hu claims. I saved your life so that one day I might save my own. Xie Yuan asked in confusion, why would Miss Song still need to save her own life? I fell silent for a moment before beginning to fabricate a story. I once harmed Xie Huaishu's beloved. He's a venomous man who never forgets a slight. Without some leverage, I fear I might die at his hands. Young Lady Song is quite honest. So what Song Yuan said last night, about my admiration for your highness, wasn't true. I was just trying to use you, in my past life, to contend with Xie Huaishu. I exploited Xie Yuan for a lifetime. This time around, my conscience has awakened. I don't want to deceive him again. Xie Yuan simply smiled at me. It's all right, as long as Miss Song knows of my admiration for you. That's enough. I stared at him in a daze. In my past life, Xie Yuan had been so intimidating. I'd never seen him smile so gently before. It wasn't until he left that I finally snapped out of my trance. Did Xie Yuan just say, he admires me? Why would he admire me? I asked Song Yuan softly as we rode in the carriage back to the capital. Song Yuan thought for a moment and said, Don't all the operas say that when someone saves your life, you pledge yourself to them in return? I blinked and continued, But isn't it always the woman who pledges herself in those stories? Does this kind of thing even distinguish between men and women? Song Yuan pondered for a moment before saying earnestly, if elder sister could marry His Highness the Prince of Su, it actually seems quite good. His Majesty has always doted on Xie Huaishu, his legitimate eldest son. When Xie Huaishu ascends the throne in the future, I let out a cold laugh. Wouldn't that be the perfect opportunity to eliminate both of us in one fell swoop? As the words fell, Xie Yuan's voice drifted faintly from outside the carriage. Don't worry, I'll make sure he never ascends the throne. Hearing Xie Yuan's voice, my earlobes instantly burned with heat. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance did I dare to speak again. Did he hear everything we just said? Is he going to rebel for my sake? Sister, haven't you heard the poem? What is love in this world that makes lovers vow to share life and death? Vow to share life and death? That's a bit much. Xie Yuan arrived in the capital 2 days ahead of us. Song Yuan asked me, is Prince Su going to the palace to ask His Majesty for your hand in marriage? The old Taoist priest His Majesty met in Jiangnan said I was inauspicious and would bring calamity to the nation's fortune. I curled my lips. How could His Majesty possibly agree to let me marry into the imperial family? What if Prince Su kneels and refuses to rise, threatening to die unless he gets his way? That wouldn't be the Xie Yuan I know. After returning to the Duke's residence with Song Yuan, everything changed. Although General Hu petitioned to annul my engagement with the Hu family, the rumors of my ill omen, as divined by Daoist Shuqing, had already spread throughout the capital. There were even whispers in the city that Hu Changfeng's death was also caused by my misfortune. Upon returning home, I went from being the family's pride to its deepest shame. On the contrary, it was Song Qingwan, whose fate as a phoenix was divined by Daoist Shuqing, who became the most revered person in the Duke's residence. Not only did Song Qingwan become the Princess of Huai, but she would soon follow Xie Huaishu into the Eastern Palace as the crown princess, destined to be the future empress. On one of her rare visits home, Song Qingwan casually mentioned that Song Hui's courtyard was too dim for studying, and just like that, my courtyard was given to him. I had no choice but to move to a remote corner of the estate. Song Yuan's face was full of indignation. Grandmother now greets you with nothing but sarcasm. She always despised Song Qingwan and Song Hui, yet now they've become the apples of her eye. Grandmother fawns on those above and tramples those below. And father has always been indifferent, I said calmly. It's no surprise at all that I've achieved what I have since returning to the capital. Song Yuan sighed. Elder sister is still more composed than I am. Naturally, after all, I've lived an extra lifetime compared to him. I had seen through these matters in my past life. None of this is important. I raised my eyes to look at him and said solemnly, what matters is that Mr. You once served as the head of the Hanlin Academy. Since he's willing to take you as his student, you must study diligently. Song Yuan nodded and said, elder sister, don't worry, I will surely pass the imperial examinations and earn an official rank, so that in the future you'll never have to suffer such humiliation again. In my previous life, he had indeed done just that. As long as Xie Huaishu remains in this lifetime, he will never be able to pass the imperial examinations. Not only that, but Xie Huaishu would also spare no effort to eliminate him. Fortunately, although Mr. Yi had retired to his hometown, the Yi family had been established in Jiangnan for a century. After Song Yuan went to the Yi family, Xie Huaishu found it much harder to find an opportunity to act against him. I looked up at Song Yuan with a smile. Study hard. This time it's your elder sister's turn to protect you. After Song Yuan's carriage departed, I stood at the doorway for quite some time before going back inside. My gaze lingered absent-mindedly on the crabapple blossoms in the garden when I suddenly looked up and met a pair of gloomy eyes. It was Xie Huaishu. My entire body stiffened. Could he have discovered that I secretly sent Song Yuan to Jiangnan just now? It shouldn't be possible. Song Yuan left through the servants' gate just now, and Xie Huaishu, with his noble status, would never go to such a place. Steadying my emotions, I bowed to him and asked softly, why has your highness come to this place? He frowned slightly as he looked at me. Why are you treating me so coldly? I took a step back, lowering my lashes to conceal the emotions in my eyes. Your highness has married my half-sister. I understand the principle that men and women should not be too familiar. Hearing this, he chuckled softly. I know you're angry that I couldn't marry you, but with your current reputation, I'm afraid you can only be my mistress. At our first meeting after rebirth, he couldn't wait to humiliate me. I gave him a cold smile. The whole capital knows I bring misfortune. If I follow your highness, I might bring such calamity that you'd meet utter defeat and die without a whole corpse. Xie Huaishu's pupils suddenly contracted as he grabbed my wrist. What did you say? I shook him off forcefully and said sharply, Your Highness should restrain yourself. I no longer wished to engage with him and turned to leave. Unfortunately, the scene just now was witnessed by Song Qingwan, who had come out looking for Xie Huaishu. She barged into my courtyard with her entourage in tow. You shameless wretch, how dare you seduce His Highness with your fox-like charms? I gave a cold smile. The place where I live is remote and hard to reach, yet I encountered His Highness the Prince of Huai. Clearly, it was he who shamelessly approached me. Are you blind, sister? You, Song Qingwan was momentarily left speechless by my retort. The maid beside her whispered in her ear, your status is noble, while she is now no different from an orphan. There are many ways to deal with her, why cause displeasure here? Hearing this, Song Qingwan flashed me a triumphant smile. Just you wait. During the meal, Song Qingwan glanced at my father and feigned concern as she said, Father, now that no one wants to marry sister. Aren't you worried? My father looked troubled. Well, Song Qingwan sighed. Noble families might look down on elder sister. Father could help her consider those scholars without prominent family backgrounds. We shouldn't delay her lifelong happiness. It dawned on me, she had been setting me up for this all along. The legitimate daughter of a duke's household marrying a poor scholar would surely become the laughingstock of the entire capital. She blinked and continued coquettishly, actually. With father's support, there's no need to worry about elder sister's future husband lacking prospects. Hearing this, my father finally found a way to save face. It's admirable how you always think of your sister. I'll certainly keep this matter in mind. Song Qingwan, having gotten her way, looked at me with a triumphant expression. I simply ate in silence, as if none of this concerned me. Grandmother looked at Song Qingwan with doting affection. You, since childhood. Whatever you asked of your father, he never refused. As the words fell, a crisp sound was heard. Following the sound, I saw Xie Huaishu's chopsticks fall from his hand. He was gazing at Song Qingwan with a complicated expression. Indeed, in her previous life, according to Song Qingwan's suicide note, she was merely an illegitimate daughter I could bully at will before her marriage. How could she possibly be this beloved in her family home, in our past lives? Xie Huaishu and I fought to the death over this baseless hatred, leaving both sides severely wounded. Fortunately, after rebirth, we no longer have any connection whatsoever. Late at night, I had just removed my hairpin. A dark figure climbed in through the window. The night wind crept in with it, causing the candlelight to flicker violently before suddenly extinguishing. Though I'd experienced this many times in past lives, I still instinctively startled. Xie Yuan said solemnly, Why do you live in such a remote courtyard? I almost went to the wrong place. I looked at him under the moonlight. You didn't break into Song Hui's room, did you? His expression turned cold. Then I would have killed him with a single strike. Sure enough, he's just as violent as the Xie Yuan I knew in my past life. Always ready to kill at the slightest provocation. I stood up, lit the candle, and poured him a cup of tea. Xie Yuan took the tea, his tone softening considerably. You asked me to do something, and I've accomplished it all. You'll see the results in 2 months. Xie Yuan gazed at me across the candlelight, his deep-set eyes shadowed and unreadable in the flickering glow. He stared at me like that for a long while. Meeting his gaze, I asked, Does your Highness wish to ask me why I, like Xie Huaishu, can foresee events yet to come? His eyelids lifted slightly. You'll speak if you wish to, if not, you must have your reasons. There's really nothing I don't want to say, it just depends whether your Highness would believe me. I paused, then continued, This lifetime for me is merely living again after death. Many things I've already experienced in my previous life. Second Imperial brother can foresee things because he's the same as me living a second life. I took a deep breath and looked at him. I've told you everything now. This doesn't count as scheming against you, does it? He didn't answer. But instead asked me, in that previous life you mentioned, what was our relationship? What kind of relationship? Naturally, it's the kind that can't see the light of day. I pursed my lips and muttered softly, I did think about using you for revenge, but it didn't work out anyway. He stared at me intently. What did you say? My eyes darted around. And nothing. Xie Yuan turned to glance at me as he left, the corners of his lips curling into a faint, elusive smile. Since you've been reborn into this life, many things from your past life no longer count. No longer count. What doesn't count? His gaze lingered on me for a moment before he continued. I'll protect you this time. In recent months, Daoist Shuqing had accurately predicted several major events in the capital, proving infallible in his divinations. Not only the Emperor, but even the entire court officials deeply believed in his words, if I'm not mistaken. Those predicted events were all things Xie Huaishu had forewarned Daoist Shuqing about. relying on memories from his past life, yet Xie Huaishu remained aloof in both lifetimes, untouched by worldly affairs. He would never know that the disasters he had the Daoist Xu Qing predict could be altered with just a slight manipulation, the workers building the river embankment, having received extra rewards, extended their labor by a month, thus the Kang River's breach occurred 3 days later than in the previous life. In the past life, the East Market was struck by lightning and consumed by fire, destroying over 100 shops, though it was deemed a natural disaster. Simply removing the iron and copper ornaments from the rooftops in advance and increasing patrols would have quickly contained the modest flames. Instead, it was the West Market that suffered a great fire from lightning. The successive variables were enough to completely ruin the reputation of Daoist Xu Qing, who was once known for his flawless calculations. In the previous life, there were still 2 years before Xie Huaishu was appointed as the crown prince, yet now he had already taken residence in the Eastern Palace. Undoubtedly, Daoist Xu Qing must have played a significant role in this. Recently, Daoist Xu Qing had repeatedly miscalculated his divinations, provoking the emperor's wrath. Before Xie Huaishu could silence the Daoist Xu Qing by killing him, Xie Yuan had already brought the Daoist before his majesty. Terrified out of his wits, the once dignified and immortal-like Daoist Xu Qing was now trembling all over, unable to utter a complete sentence. Xie Yuan presented the correspondence between himself and Xie Huaishu. Indeed, all of Daoist Xu Qing's divinations had been fed to him by Xie Huaishu. After his majesty's furious outburst, he stared blankly at the letters and murmured, "How could the crown prince have foreseen these disasters? Your subject has heard there are talented individuals among the common folk who can predict natural calamities by observing celestial phenomena." Xie Yuan glanced at the trembling Daoist priest Xu Qing kneeling weakly on the ground and sneered, "But they're merely ordinary mortals, how could they truly glimpse the secrets of heaven?" At that moment, I supported the Empress Dowager, who had just returned from recuperating from illness. As we entered the Grand Hall, the Empress Dowager's lips curled in a cold smile. The Crown Prince has always been highly regarded by the Emperor. The throne would have been his sooner or later. Why would he resort to such despicable means to deceive His Majesty? His Majesty's expression darkened upon hearing this. That unfilial son, Her Majesty the Empress Dowager notices the Emperor's complexion seems less favorable than usual. The Empress Dowager narrowed her phoenix eyes, glaring at the palace attendants serving beside His Majesty, and angrily said, "You worthless servants, how have you been attending to him daily?" The servants in the hall knelt in unison, their heads bowed to the ground, as the chief eunuch spoke with trembling fear. Reporting to the Empress Dowager, "We servants have been extremely careful with His Majesty's daily meals and attire, but recently..." The eunuch glanced at the dragged-out Taoist priest Xu Qing and said with a quiver, "His Majesty has been taking the elixirs offered by that old Taoist." Hearing this, His Majesty's face instantly turned ashen, and he slammed the table as he stood up. "Summon the imperial physician at once." As soon as I entered the Sinning Palace, I knelt before the Empress Dowager. She looked at me with a cold laugh and said, "Weren't you quite capable? Why come seeking this old one now?" Previously, this humble subject did not wish to disturb Her Majesty's convalescence with matters of marriage. I knelt on the ground, offering the medicine bowl to the Empress Dowager. "But without your Majesty's intervention today, I could never have completed this scheme." The Empress Dowager took the medicine bowl and asked solemnly, "Do you hate the Crown Prince so much for not marrying you that you would drive him to his doom?" With lowered eyes, I replied, "That is not the case. This subject has long since ceased to care for him." "Oh, then why? Could it be because he once attempted to poison Prince Su?" Your Majesty asks knowingly. "This humble subject was raised by your Majesty's own hands." I blinked at the Empress Dowager and continued, "The Crown Prince has long lost any childhood affection for me because of Song Qingwan. If he ascends the throne, neither my younger brother nor I will have any future to speak of." Enough, the situation is already decided. This old woman shall consider it a favor to Prince Su. She narrowed her eyes slightly, looking at me. "However, few men in this world would fancy a woman as calculating as you. In the future, Prince Su might." All this I knew well. In my past life, Xie Huaishu deeply distrusted me for most of his days. Such days, I had long grown weary of them. I lowered my eyes slightly and said, "This humble maiden has no intention of marrying into the imperial family." The eunuch soon came to deliver the message. No poison was detected in the elixirs presented by the Qingshu Taoist, but they did find juice from the hellebore plant in the pills. His Majesty has long had the habit of drinking ginseng wine. If taken together with these elixirs, it would severely deplete his vital energy and blood. The Empress Dowager smiled and asked me. Those few hellebore-laced pills were mixed in by the court physician I instructed to test the medicine. Yet not the entire Imperial Medical Bureau is under my control. How did you know the Emperor's dragon body was weakened? I pursed my lips and whispered softly. This humble subject once heard the Empress Dowager say that your Majesty is occupied with court affairs day and night, not to mention the 3,000 beauties in the harem. Since ancient times, few emperors have not suffered from physical weakness. I thought that even if the imperial physicians detected such a condition, they wouldn't dare speak of it, so today seemed the perfect opportunity to broach the subject under the pretext of discussing the elixir. Upon hearing this, a faint smile appeared on the Empress Dowager's ailing face. You're not even married yet you speak of such matters without shame. That night, the emperor executed the Taoist priest Shu Qing and issued an edict to depose Xie Huaishu as crown prince. However, the decree to depose the crown prince has not yet left the palace walls. For now, the emperor has only imprisoned Xie Huaishu in the inner prison. After serving the Empress Dowager her medicine and waiting until she fell asleep, I returned to the side hall. Xiaohong was tidying up my bed while chatting about matters concerning the Duke's residence. The second miss has returned to the Duke's residence to rest during her pregnancy. She must have caught wind of something. The maids in the residence say she's been selling off her jewelry and valuables these past few days, perhaps trying to bribe officials for the deposed crown prince's sake. The deposed crown prince is imprisoned in the inner prison. She doesn't have the means to bribe anyone under His Majesty's watch. The smile on my lips suddenly froze as I ordered Xiaohong, have our people in the residence keep a close eye on her. The next day, as I had predicted, Song Qingwan indeed took the banknotes, disguised herself as a maid, and fled the capital. She made the same foolish mistake as in her previous life. In her past life, before General Hu set off for battle, he left a team of elite soldiers to escort the women of the general's household back to the capital. But Song Qingwan, driven by greed, took advantage of the chaos to abscond with the general's fortune and fled back to the capital alone. On her way back to the capital, corpses littered the ground as far as the eye could see. On a sudden impulse, she wrote a suicide note, intending to find a faceless female corpse, dress it in her own clothes, and frame me for her death. Little did she know, that note would become her actual suicide letter. Unfortunately, in my previous life, by the time I uncovered the truth, Song Qingwan was already dead. This lifetime, I finally seized my chance. Now that Xie Huaishu is imprisoned, her fleeing in secret is a serious crime. I did her a favor by sending her to the inner prison to keep Xie Huaishu company. Xie Huaishu never expected that before his imprisonment, he had made no arrangements for himself, focusing solely on protecting Song Qingwan by sending her to the Duke's residence. Yet the woman he had loved for 2 lifetimes abandoned him when disaster struck. Xie Huaishu clamored to see me from within the inner prison. I don't want to see him again. A few days passed, and he never caused trouble again. The guards said he often muttered with vacant eyes, "All who betray Zhen shall die." They all said he'd gone mad, daring to call himself Zhen, the royal Wei. After the grand funeral of the Empress Dowager, Prime Minister Liu could no longer restrain himself. He sent word to the mole, ordering him to poison General Hu and seize military power. He intended to rescue Xie Huaishu, launch a palace coup, and force the emperor to abdicate. General Hu turned the scheme against its maker. Having the mole send back a message claiming the seizure of power had succeeded, General Hu led his troops back to the capital, and just as they reached the city gates, my father, who held some military authority, stormed into the palace with his patrol soldiers. My father, always timid and cautious by nature, had been goaded by Chancellor Liu into taking such a reckless gamble. Perhaps it was to rescue his beloved Song Qingwan. Or perhaps to reclaim the wealth that was nearly within his grasp. Before long, news quickly spread from the inner prison. My father had rescued Xie Huaishu and Song Qingwan. My father still dreamed of becoming the future emperor's father-in-law. Yet what he saw was Xie Huaishu thrusting a long sword into Song Qingwan's chest. Watching Song Qingwan breathe her last, Xie Huaishu still seemed unsatisfied. Several more slashes later, the corpse became a mangled mess of flesh and blood. Blood splashed into his eyes, painting his vision crimson. Xie Huaishu looked every bit the madman. The sight before him made my father faint dead away. Having killed Song Qingwan, Xie Huaishu would surely come for me next. He led his troops and stormed into the Sinning Palace. My status forbade me from going to the Imperial Mausoleum, so at this moment, I was keeping vigil for the Empress Dowager in the Sinning Palace. Xie Huaishu sat astride his horse, pointing a blood-stained sword at me. I should have known. You've also been reborn. All who betray me must die. between us, it's always been mutual scheming. I'd gladly kill you myself. How can you even speak of betrayal? Enough, I won't hold our past life against you." He closed his eyes briefly, his voice hoarse. "Just show me some humility, and in this lifetime, I might spare both you and your brother." I couldn't help but laugh aloud. "You've gone completely mad, yet you're still offering me mercy. In my past life, I had an affair with Xie Yuan, helping him build his power not only to secure Song Yuan's position but also so that one day, he could kill you and seize the authority you value most. If you were to ask who betrayed you the deepest in this world, wouldn't that be me?" Xie Huaishu glared at me with bloodshot eyes. As if they were about to drip blood, he leaped off his horse abruptly. "Song Jinyuan, you're courting death." The veins on his temples bulged, his eyes nearly splitting with rage as he raised his sword and charged at me. The next instant, an arrow whizzed past my ear and pierced his shoulder. He collapsed swiftly, followed by 2 more arrows that pinned him down, rendering him immobile. I looked down at him and chuckled softly. "Haven't you heard of the tactic of provoking the enemy?" Not far away, dust filled the sky as the sound of galloping iron steeds grew louder from the distance. "I forgot to tell you, I already helped General Hua expose that traitor surnamed Shi. Right now, General Hua is probably rushing to the Empress palace to protect His Majesty." I watched as the last glimmer of hope in his eyes slowly extinguished and sneered coldly. "In this lifetime, you've lost completely." Suddenly, Xie Huaishu seemed to see something. His eyes filled with terror. I looked up and saw Xie Yuan dismounting his horse, his entire being radiating a murderous aura. I asked, "Why didn't you go to His Majesty's palace to protect him? That old man isn't as important as you." Xie Yuan pulled me behind him, his gaze icy as he stared at Xie Huaishu lying blooded on the ground. "Did he come here to kill you?" When Xie Huaishu saw him, it was as if he'd encountered a demon from hell. Dragging his bleeding body backward in terror, gritting his teeth, he yanked the feathered arrow from his shoulder. Xie Yuan's figure blocked my view completely, leaving me only to see strings of blood droplets suspended in midair before splattering across the brick floor. In my daze, I heard Xie Yuan's voice. He took his own life. The setting sun dyed the horizon blood red as this palace coup finally came to an end. After today, the imperial throne would be Xie Yuan's for the taking. As twilight enveloped the land, Xie Yuan asked me with a smile, "Does he really think he can try that again?" "No, he's just terrified of you." Xie Yuan is someone who couldn't express his true feelings even if his life depended on it. When he decided to marry me, he pulled me aside and earnestly analyzed the pros and cons for me. He said my father was a disgraced official, and if I didn't marry him, Song Yuan would be the son of a criminal, with no future to speak of. Propping my chin, I asked him seriously, "You truly don't mind that I'm full of schemes? You should know I initially approached you to use your hand in eliminating Xie Huaishu. Even if it's scheming, out of so many people, you chose only me to scheme with." He looked at me, a light chuckle escaping his throat. "If not for your schemes, I'd have long died at the hands of assassins." I curved my eyes at him. "Then I'll give you the chance to repay me with your hand in marriage." 3 years later, I was established as the Empress of the Central Palace. On our wedding night, Xie Yuan's fingertips brushed aside the sweat-dampened strands of hair from my forehead, while a flush of desire spread across the corners of his eyes. Was it only 3 years of mourning? It felt like an entire lifetime. I wrapped my arms around his neck, leaning in to whisper softly by his ear, "Because you have me in your heart." It wasn't until late at night that I finally fell asleep, utterly exhausted. I sank into deep slumber, and in my dazed state, dreamed of my past life. On the night I died from illness, the palace was engulfed in roaring flames, bathed in a haze of blood. Xie Yuan stood expressionless before the grand hall. He seemed to have noticed me and smiled in my direction. "I listened to you, I killed him." As his laughter continued, tears tinged with blood trailed down from the corners of his eyes. In my dazed state, I opened my eyes to find Xie Yuan gently wiping the corners of my eyes with his fingertips. "Why are you crying?" Seeing that I didn't speak, he held me tightly and whispered softly, "Go to sleep now, my queen." I leaned against his chest and suddenly murmured his name softly, "Xie Yuan." The moonlight illuminated his deep-set eyes and brows. His eyelids lifted slightly as he responded drowsily. I whispered softly by his ear, "In this lifetime, let's live well together." Slowly closing my eyes, I heard Xie Yuan's voice. He replied, "Okay."